We all have a natural tendency to point out when things are wrong. Many studies have shown that our eyes are simply drawn to what's out of place. We hear what is wrong, and so we tend to point out what is wrong. And as wise men and women, there's a tendency to point out when people are doing things that are unproductive or wrong. But people also need to know when they're making progress. I was talking just the other day on the phone with a man who has made enormous progress in his life just in recent months. He's just unrecognizable. Previously, his life was drama, pain, attention getting. He was just miserable. And as I talked to him on Skype, he just chattered about this and that, like a 12-year-old girl would do. Just chattered on and on. And in his former life, that would have been a kind of attention getting. But this was different. The chattering wasn't important. The content wasn't really all that important, not to insult what he was talking about. I was impressed with how calm he was about all the events that he was describing. And I told him so. I said, he went on and on for some time, and he finally said, would you like to say anything? Would you like to say anything while I take a breath? And I said, yeah, you're calm. And he wrote later on, and he said, do you know that no one has ever told me before in my life that I was calm? Ever. I've been told that I was dramatic and engaging and entertaining and fun, and I thought that was great. In fact, I lived for it. I craved hearing those words. But now people say things like that to me all the time. Things like, I expect you're the kind of person who's happy wherever you are and whoever you're with. Or, how is it that you're so calm about this? Or they'll turn to somebody else and say, listen to him. He's just so calm while everybody else has got their hair on fire. And it's really just because I'm not talking all the time, trying to make people like me and using up energy working out what everybody will think of what I say. So I have more time to feel loved, to think of them, and then the answers to the real problem seems easier to see. And when you don't talk all the time, people seem to listen when you do talk. Listen to the wisdom in this guy. You can see more clearly. People listen more carefully when you do speak. And then he concludes with, it isn't really clever. It's just what happens when you feel loved. This is an amazing interaction and letter. Look at all the things that are happening in your life. This is huge stuff that you can't fake. You have more energy, you're more authentic, you're more calm, and you have a greater variety of feelings, and you're able to solve problems more easily. You continued. It's much more wonderful just to feel loved and not want to be loving as your greatest ambition. Anything else you do, oh, sorry, I said that wrong. It's much more wonderful just to feel loved and to want to be loving as your greatest ambition. Anything else you do is just what's necessary to stay alive, to stay well and happy in the physical world, and frankly, not all that important. Another thing that's amazing about being loving, when you really are, is that there's no conflict. Beautiful observation. When you feel loving and peaceful, it's really pretty hard to get worked up about much of anything. You continue. If someone asks you about a problem with their sister, and then the sister she's complaining about asks you about her problems with the sister you've just been talking to, and what you say and feel is always consistent when you're loving. What's good for one is good for the other. What's loving to one is loving to the other, even if they choose not to see it, as the solution is always with the person in front of you, changing or seeing things differently. The problem is never with the person who's absent and being complained about That just is the loveliest, distinct summation of the entire process of real love and of being a wise person. So I guess I'm reading it just so you can get an idea of how, in a relatively short period of time, people can get a really simple yet elegant understanding of what unconditional love can do in their lives. Here's another person who says, watching the video chat, I felt compelled to jump through the screen and smother your head with kisses. Well, please don't resist. This is a guy. He says, I feel loved as you talk. We really are not stupid. We can feel genuine concern. Most of us just have never seen it or felt it. You continue, I had an incredible day with some loving people, and although that was great, I realized that there was something that scared me. Until recently, I had never felt loved, and so the closest I'd ever felt to that was having sex with women. So I did it a lot with a lot of women, and now I'm just beginning a new relationship with a woman, and I realize I'm kind of nervous. I don't really know what to do without establishing the relationship right from the beginning with sex. So I feel kind of panicked. Good for you to see it. Sex is easy and cheap and not real. It doesn't produce real happiness, but we come to rely on it. So what a tragedy it would be to ruin a potentially beautiful developing relationship by introducing sex into it at this point. You, better than just about anybody I've ever talked to, have vast experience to prove that fantastic sex doesn't create relationships. So if you just remember that, it will help you not to screw this one up, forgive the pun, by having sex too early in the relationship. So good for you. You continue, I told the group that I'd slept with a lot of women, I'd never been faithful to whatever woman I was with, and that I'd used women all my life. I was nervous since most of the group was women, but they understood. They said, we all use something, and they didn't take it at all personally that I had used women. I realized that my mother had never been loving, and the most affection I had ever seen from her was the sexual attention she paid to her boyfriends. So I wanted that. And sometimes she hugged and kissed me like she did her boyfriend. So it all became very confusing to me. I mean, look how thoroughly we screw kids up just from the things that they see. We do whatever we can to get a good feeling or to get less pain, even if it's horribly destructive. And you're seeing that. If you remember that, you won't blow this relationship with this new woman. So, hallelujah. You continue. So I formed the lies that sex with a woman is acceptable. I formed the lie that sex with a woman was acceptance, and not having sex was rejection, which makes perfect sense. So what did you do? Had more and more sex because it was more and more acceptance, even though it never really gave you the long-term feeling of acceptance. Tears were streaming down my face as I was no longer afraid of being rejected by women. In other words, not having sex with them. I could really feel and accept the love and nurturing that I was being given by the women in the group. I'm feeling so different as my whole perspective has shifted. I'm in a kind of no man's land, so I'm a little lost, but that's not a bad thing. This real love stuff really is a miracle, and I think this time I can have a real relationship. There are so many people. I heard of a man who was just recently, he's been alone for several months since he left his wife. And he talked to his coach and asked her what she thought about his having sex with his new girlfriend. And she said, well, if it feels good, then go ahead and do it. That's just plain flat stupid advice, as this man proves. Sex does not create relationships. So why would a coach give somebody such terrible advice? Because this particular coach lives that way. This particular coach does have sex with men to establish relationships. She has established over hundreds of sexual experiences that it never leads to a lasting relationship. But if it's the closest you've ever felt, if it's the least pain you've ever felt, then dang it, it's just like we can't help but try it again. Well, maybe this time, maybe with this guy, we're really that stupid. Just as thousands of times I injected myself with narcotics, and every single time I knew it was wrong. Every single time I knew it wouldn't make me happy. But maybe this time the dulling of the pain would last a little longer. And I was willing to essentially sell my soul for that moment of less pain, as this man has been with using women, as this coach has been all of her life in selling herself and recommending that her clients do the same. It's a very dangerous form of imitation love, because it contains so much of so many of the forms of imitation love. It's a powerful addiction. Here's a woman who has been hypersensitive to her husband for years and years. She accuses him of playing mind games with her. She says that he tortures her with his criticism. I met him, and he's a bit of a goof. He's not entirely sensitive, kind of a clod, really, but he's not malicious. That was really obvious. So it was so different from the characterization that she had given him. So what's the solution? To her, I said, you got two choices, honey. You can tell him when there are certain things that really bother you. For example, before she leaves the room, he tells her to turn off the light. Or if she makes the bed, he comes back in and tells her how to make it right. I'm making some of this up. But if there's certain things that you just can't stand to hear, then you tell him, you say, look at me. For the rest of our life, I don't ever want to hear you comment on my whatever. The way I make the bed, the way I do my hair, the way I whatever. So here are your only two choices. Tell him when certain things bother you because you're just too weak to deal with them. And that's okay. We don't have to be strong enough to deal with everything and be perfectly loving. Or, honey, you got to quit taking everything that he says personally. He's just thoughtless. He's not cruel. She kept doing it. I mean, every email began with his name. No kidding. He said, my husband, she would say, my husband, she'd either say his name or my husband. My husband did this, my husband did this. And I finally just got really stern. And one time she asked me if she could talk to me on the phone. And I said, yes, as long as you don't say the words he, him, husband, or his name. We got on the phone and she said, I don't know what to say. Yeah, exactly. But she's finally starting to get it. She's beginning to feel peaceful. She listened to those two things I said. There are some things that she really can't listen to him talk to her about. She can't stand it when he screams at her when she takes the wrong turn while they're driving. Well, gee, funny her. So that particular thing she doesn't like. She's told him she doesn't want to hear his driving comments. But the other things, she's just let him go. Instead of, she would sit all day long and fuss about a thing that he'd said in the morning before he left for work. And she said, I'm less reactive to him. I'm kinder to him, and I'll be darned if he hasn't eliminated almost all the things that bothered me before. So a part of him, not intentionally, as she would nag at him about how he picked at her, part of him was like, well, you can't tell me what to do. And he'd do it even more. We don't like being controlled. And she wanted to control, her solution was to control every single thing he did that bothered her. We just have a natural built-in reflex to being told what we have to do or what we can't do. You want to prove this? Go into a room full of 3-year-olds and put out a bowl of jelly beans and say, now, I'll be back in a minute, but don't anybody stick any jelly beans in their nose. It's a guarantee that some of these kids are going to stick jelly beans in their nose. How do I know? Well, I didn't actually do the experiment, but somebody else did, and I got to work in the emergency room and pull beans out of their nose. Being kind works far better than being controlling. That's the point. Here somebody says, a friend of mine died the other day in a motorcycle accident. Somebody that I used to play sports with. I used to work with him and go on holidays with, the guys from the team. And on one holiday with him, I got in trouble with the police. We caused some damage and I had to pay a, $1,000 fine, and I didn't have any money. And he got all the people on the team to put money into a pot, and they got me out of jail. And when I was in the police cell, I could hear him saying to the police that he would pay for the fine entirely out of his own money and the money that he collected. And when I said, I'll pay you back, he said, don't be silly. We all do stupid things in life as we learn from life. How cool is this? A little example from a sports team of a friend being unconditionally loving. When we went back to meet the rest of the team, I was nervous what they would think of me. In that moment, in the back of the police car, when we were getting dropped off, I remember him saying, don't worry what anybody else thinks. Just know that I care about you. I'm sharing this story because it's such a sweet example of loving from somebody who doesn't know the word real love at all. And he said, it'd be wise to lay low for a while and maybe even think about spending the rest of the holiday around him. In other words, instead of going out and getting drunk and smashing into stores. What a kind man. You continue. As I look back now with the time that I spent with him over the years, I don't feel sad or upset or nothing, really. The odd thing is that what I've learned from you about real love and God, I know that he's in a better place and everything's going to be all right. This leads me to all the people on Facebook now who are acting like victims and stuff, and I can just feel the bad vibes, all around his death. And they're only thinking about themselves, whining, crying, carrying on. They're not thinking about him at all, just themselves. So do I really want to be around these people? If I go to his funeral, for example, do I go or do I stay away? Simply ask yourself, would it make a difference to his family if you went? Obviously, it's not going to make a difference to him. Funerals aren't for the people who die. I mean, grow up. They're for the people who are left behind. I tend not to go to funerals myself because most people are acting like victims. They don't even remember that you're there. But sometimes I go because I know something about the family, or I just get a feeling about going. And I've experienced that just a gentle, sincere word can actually make a difference to the wife or to other people. I have, for example, taken the wife aside from the long waiting line, just taken her to the next room and said, all of this time after the death, you've been consoling everybody else, haven't you? In fact, I'll bet you a nickel you've been preparing food for the wake. How are you doing? And she just dissolved in tears and was grateful that I was concerned about her. So you have to decide whether that's something that you can do or that's something that his wife could hear. You continue. What would be the loving thing to say in a card for his wife and family in real love terms? Up to you. I don't send cards. They just don't seem to mean anything to me. Loving acts do. Going around a week later and seeing how she's doing, that's a loving act that matters. Going around a week later and mowing the lawn because her husband is dead and now she's got a long lawn, that matters. Going around and asking her if there are any of the 1,000 things that he didn't fix around the house before he died that you could do, that matters. You'll figure it out. You figure out what would be loving to her, and you'll know whether you should go to the funeral and what to do afterward. You'll just know. Somebody wrote and said, talk about trading. My wife says that I want to connect with people just so that I feel better about myself. Now, there's more to this story than this. This is a man who could sit in a room with you for years and never say anything. He's very quiet. And lately she has been just hounding him to connect more with people, to make more real love calls. And so now that he is trying to reach out and connect with people, because he has been, now her criticism is that he's just doing it so that he'll feel better about himself. My inclination would be to tell her to get off his back. Let somebody else do the coaching. You're going to have to figure out why you connect with people. If you do it because you feel like you have to, then you're trading. If you connect with people so that they give you something in return, then you're trading. But if you connect with people just because it feels good to do that, then you'll know that it's really not about trading. I'm gonna get something and put under here. This we have to do like we did with this one. They get hot. A guy wrote me and was telling me that he got angry at people at work. And he said, where did I really go wrong today? What was weird about today was that I actually knew that I might get angry, and I could see that I could have done more myself to make sure that I was more prepared for the day. I actually told myself this, and I told myself to be loving and not be angry, and yet I still went and sounded all snarky with people at work. I did forget to stop and remember that I was loved. Was that the big mistake? Probably. And the little mistakes you already know about, like doing more yourself to be prepared for the day. When we wait till the last minute to be prepared for something, like putting a piece of plastic under the computer. This one always needs one. When we wait till the last minute and we feel rushed, we do feel more drained, which is what you experienced. I don't know where the water went, but so prepare the little things so that we don't feel drained, and we overall do much better. And then, like you said, remember that there are people who love you. You are already overall so much happier. You are. So you went to work one day, you forgot some of the little things, you didn't prepare adequately, you got a little snarky with people. Oh, forget about it. Your life is so much happier than it was several months ago. I think sometimes we spend far too much time worried about the little mistakes. Enjoy your happiness. I've said this to 3 or 4 people just in the last couple of days. People say, what's my next step? What should I be doing? I made a mistake. What do you see that I need to do? Enjoy the step you're on. Have a little celebration about how well you're doing. Don't make too big a deal of the little lapses. Stuff just happens that surprises us, empties us out more quickly than we thought. Just recover and remember the truth better the next time. Let that time go. You keep going. You say, I'm a bit surprised that I was angry, even though I tried to pretend that I wasn't, and I did the calm, pretending calm thing, but I wasn't loving. I was thinking entirely about myself and how inconvenient it was that this particular person hadn't done a job that he'd been assigned to do. I think I should have done 3 things. Stop for a second and think about how you and other people love me. Yeah? 2, think through the worst case scenario of how things could have screwed up and realized that it could still be easily fixed. I find that to be a very useful help. When something's going bad, I figure, so what's the worst thing that could happen? I mean, just now, both computers started making noise at the same time, which can be distracting in a recording later, because they weren't supported, kept off the felt cover of the desk. So what do? You support them. One on a piece of plastic, and one I just lifted up on the microphone box. And they've both calmed down, and so for a second, for 30 seconds, I looked like I didn't have my head on. So that's the worst case scenario. So what? 3, your list. Find a way to say nothing except what was absolutely necessary to get the job done, and leave out any other talking for a time when all my anger was gone and I was full of love and able to be loving. Would that nail it? Yeah, it'd pretty much do it. When you're mad, that's never the time to tell people how they screwed up. No matter how hard things are at work, remember this. This would be good for all of us. Your job is 1, something that just has to be done. Number 2, something you're paid to do. I cannot believe how many times a week people call me and complain about their job. Well, I hate this and I hate that, and my boss, blah, 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 blah. And one of my first questions is, so help me understand from the beginning, are you paid to do this job? Because if you're paid to do it, then shut up. Because your job actually isn't what your job description is. People say, well, that's not in my job description. No, you're paid to do whatever your supervisor tells you to do, including stand on your head. And 3, your job is something that you have the amazing skills to do. It's very likely that despite your mistakes, you do your job better than, well, actually, this would be easy to suppose, better than 99.9% of the people in the country. So lighten up. We get pretty excited about job stuff when it's really a way to earn a living. It's something we're supposed to do, something we're paid to do. And as an extra bonus, it gives us an opportunity to be loving toward people. Sometimes. Sometimes we do it well, sometimes we don't. Sylvie's story. For some reason, there are 2 Sylvie stories, which delights me no end. Maybe because they're short. Her mother says, here's an example of Sylvie making a request, not a demand. Sylvie walks up to Bruce. She calls him Brucey. So Sylvie's 4 and Bruce is 3. And she walks up and says, Brucey, I want a big squeeze hug. Will you give me one? Bruce pauses. Yep. Sylvie says, great. And Bruce gives her a hug. She doesn't demand things from her brother. And as a result, it's a loving experience, both for her and for him. He gets to feel loving instead of feeling coerced. Second story. Jeanette says, I cut up some strawberries for the kids, and Bruce scarfed his down in no time, like any well-trained boy does, you know, more. He held out his bowl and asked for more. That's what boys do. I explained that we ate all the strawberries and suggested some alternative fruits that he could eat, but he was set on strawberries. Sylvie put some of hers in his bowl. Can't you just see them? Sylvie eating one little piece of strawberry at a time, and Bruce just tipping the bowl up and swallowing them all. She put some of her strawberries in his bowl and said, Mom, I did what you couldn't do. This would never have occurred to me. She said, I gave Bruce strawberries because I had some, but you didn't have any. That is just so cool that she could see that she could love her brother, and she wasn't saying this like an arrogant adult would say it. She was saying, see, I did something that even you couldn't do. Children need to feel a sense of the genuine power that comes from loving the people around them. And they get good experience doing that with their siblings. Here's somebody who wrote and said, I'm feeling content and calm. Dare I even say, and there are ellipses here, so hence the pause. Dare I even say happy? Yeah, you could dare to say such a thing. You might even consider that you deserve to be happy, and that each day you don't have to decide all over again whether you're worth it, which is kind of what you do now. It's kind of what everybody does. People who make real love calls are, and it's not entirely a bad thing. We need to make the calls. We need to feel connected. But very often we make calls to prove all over again that we're worth it, as opposed to just enjoying the connection. See the difference? We deserve to be loved. Find somebody who can love you all the way to your bones and believe it. Instead of the next morning waking up and going, okay, let's see, Groundhog Day, let's start all over again. Am I worth loving? That's exhausting. You continue. Yes, it took me a minute to identify how exactly I was feeling and with what words to connect them. And I still did it through a process of elimination. And I feel like I subtly look over my shoulder when I whisper the word happy. Got to get over that, kid. It's beautiful that you're saying these words. It's beautiful that you're saying, I'm happy. Twice. This is twice in, well, depends on how you count ellipses, you know, but twice in 2 sentences you said you were happy. Prior to lately, you had no practice with that word before. I am happy. Those are some of the most difficult phrases of all in life for people to say. You love me? To look somebody in the eye and say, you love me. That takes monumental faith and courage. And to say, I am happy. Because when you say, you love me and I am happy, whoa, that's when you can really be disappointed and hurt. So now you do have practice with that word. Good for you. You continue. Yes, I do. It amazes me how much I freak out at any inkling of abandonment. But it makes sense. It's why I cling to the point of ridiculousness, or I completely isolate, and I don't get close to anybody, and I push people away. Other triggers are anything having to do with, she listed a lot of things that trigger her feelings of being abandoned and not feeling loved. Interrupting, not liking, disagreeing. And the other big trigger is feeling stupid. Combine them all, and I'm a potential nuclear bomb. It's just a lot of fear. So that it's just got you on the trigger edge. Anybody, it's getting to be too old-fashioned. Nobody does this anymore. People hire exterminators, and they get these glue strips to catch mice, but you really got to set a mouse trap yourself. You know, you really do. You need to set it wrong and snap it on your own finger. A mouse trap is an excellent little lesson, and one of the lessons of a mouse trap is that it works best when you have it on a hair trigger. There's a little brass rod that sticks on a trigger, and if you just barely set the rod, barely set it on the trigger, then the mouse only has to just barely touch it, like when eating the cheese, or they actually prefer peanut butter. Snap, it gets the mouse. Whereas if you set the trigger securely, you don't get the mouse. The mouse can almost walk on the trigger and nothing will happen. We walk around on a hair trigger all the time because of all the fear. You continue. I notice that the more loved and peaceful I feel, the less I blindly react and stand a better chance at quieting myself down. So it's more important to feel loved than to simply know when I react, because sometimes I don't know I'm going to react. And if I'm feeling loved, I have a better chance of dealing with it. This really is so much simpler than people make it. I have a lady who writes to me, every few days, and she just analyzes the silliness out of everything. She just analyzes and analyzes everything. Honey, just feel loved. And the reactions will go down. Well, why do I do this? And why do I do that? And why do I do this? And what? Life is not an algorithm. Life was meant to be enjoyed. Remember the love and quit analyzing. I'm going to tell you about a woman who was so difficult during intervention, so monumentally difficult that she's one of 2 people ever in all the history of doing them here who's walked out in the middle of an intervention. The intern went, "What do we do?" I said, nothing. Just wait. She'll be back. She was back in 20 minutes. But she was just a furiously angry human being. She wrote and she said, "I'm not doing so well. Things have gotten messy with my daughter, and on Friday I plummeted into an emotional black hole, and I just don't seem to be able to get out of it." And I said, "You need to call your daddy." See, so she's started off on a victim rant, and instead of analyzing it, I said, "Call me." She continued, "I'm not feeling this way because of the incident that I had with my daughter, but for some reason it seemed to be a catalyst for something deeper." We're just going to analyze and analyze. "I woke up Saturday not feeling like my life was worth going forward, and still feeling pretty much the same. I look at my life and it seems like it's just one big failure. I've tried so hard and I've worked so hard to make things different, and they were growing, and then now everything's just failed and it's all been for nothing, and here I am 50 years old, and I look at myself and I'm fat, and my health is deteriorating, and I'm looking more and more like my mother, who just died a year and a half ago at 73. Sheesh. You could write a volume of responses to that. I mean, there's enough stuff there to analyze for a week. I said, still need your daddy. She said, I'm divorced. My daughter can't stand me. I said, you need your daddy. She said, these things I could live with if I felt like I knew how to do things differently. I don't. I don't know how to take care of myself. I don't know how to set boundaries. I don't know how to live a life true to myself, a life where I'm not trying to please others and wrap myself into all kinds of gyrations to make others like me. I don't know how to do my job or work or how to support myself. I don't even know what I want out of life. And here I am, 50-something years old. Talk to your daddy. It's all about the love. It's not about the talking. She keeps going. Just, I don't see the light anymore. I used to be optimistic, blah, 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 blah. It's in a black hole. The sun is going to burn out tomorrow. I said, sweetie, you haven't meant to. But a big part of your difference in life has been controlling people, because she was talking about how at least she had made a difference in her life before. You don't need to feel bad now. Just call me. 3 o'clock tomorrow, my time, home phone. I get an email later in the day. I remember I had just said, don't feel bad, just call me. She said, don't feel bad? Are you serious? When people are determined to feel bad, let me tell you, they really can do it. If I knew that I could do things differently, then I would. And she just went on and on. By now, of course, she's attacking me. She's attacking her daughter. She's attacking the world. She's just attacking everybody. I said, call me 3 o'clock tomorrow. In the meantime, watch movies and eat cookies. Quit thinking. She said, if I believed I could make these changes, I would. I'd let you help me if I thought it would make any difference, but I have proven that I cannot change. I've tried to do everything. I've spent all this money and all this time, and I've wasted my life, and I'm more screwed up than ever. All I can do is see 20 years down the road, and I'll die miserable and alone. Jeez. But again, I could even live with that. But I don't know how to do life that isn't about sacrificing myself for someone else. So she goes on and on and on and on about what a tragedy her life is, how much she's done for other people, how miserable she is. Finally says, I feel so lost and alone. And then ends with, thanks for listening. Now, keep in mind, I'm not laughing at her pain. She's in obvious pain, a lot of it. But it's hysterical, the complete irrationality of it. Fear makes us nuts. And what I'm laughing at is how absolutely unnecessarily crazy she's being. I said, I love you. We will talk tomorrow. She writes back, again, if I thought it would make a difference, I would talk to you. Blah, blah, blah. There's no more hope. There's more attacking. She just goes on and on. Well, she finally called. We talked. All I did was love her. For the longest time, I just sat and held her over the phone. The next day, she writes and says, as I write this, and I know in my heart that what you told me was meant to be encouragement, holding up the mirror so that I could clearly see and face the truth. And at the same time, it is discouraging. It's heartbreakingly painful and awful to see the truth. Yeah, it really is. There's no way to growing without seeing the horrible mistakes that we've made. Seeing myself clearly for the first time was horrifying, but it was freeing because I finally understood my pain and I could do something about it. She continues, the truth that while under the belief that I was protecting myself from all of those people around me that lied and manipulated and wreaked havoc in the lives of everybody around them, I have been doing exactly the same as all those people I've criticized. I use words to twist and turn situations so that I'm right. And believe me, when I want to be right, I'm really good at it. Yes, dear, you really are. I have a pretty good idea of that. But it's all just a response to pain. It's not you. So you're not broken. You're just in pain. So what's the solution? Understand what you've done. Admit what you've done. Be compassionate toward yourself for what you've done, which is not the same thing as loving yourself. And then find and feel love from somebody who can love all of you, including your pain and what you've done in response to it, including all of your insanity. She continues, I know that I'm a know-it-all, that I talk too much, I criticize, blah, 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 blah. She goes through all of these faults. She could go on for pages, and actually she does, but I'm not going to do that. So later, she and I talked again. So we talked once. She calmed down 50%. We talked again. She said, I'm sitting here with tears streaming down my face. Thank you for loving me. That's all she wanted. She didn't need analysis. Will you please keep loving me even as I find that nearly impossible? That's really a beautiful thing to say. Often we look at ourselves and we find ourselves absolutely unlovable. But there are people who are capable of loving us. We need to find those people. And it makes all the difference in the world. We talked again. And finally she sent one last message. Now, this one last message, this one sentence is so good that I want to read it twice. She said, thanks for sticking with me, not that sentence, for the last several days. She said, you've taught me that being vulnerable is being alive. Wow. And yet this is what I've been trying to avoid all my life. So all of her life she has fought, kicked, screamed, been right, carried on, acted like a victim, been a drama queen, all of that stuff, so that she didn't have to be vulnerable, because she was afraid she'd be killed, emotionally dead. And she's discovered that vulnerable is alive. That's a pretty sweet thing for somebody to discover. A woman in a real love meeting said that she is, this is somebody writing and describing this. A woman in a real love meeting said that she is a praise whore, and I immediately identify with that statement. I feel so happy and worthy when a coworker said to me, you're so easy to work with, I really like working with you. When do I know if a statement like that is just imitation love or if it's sincere on their part? Oh, honey, you don't have to discern. You don't have to know how somebody meant it. You just choose not to take it as imitation love. You don't have to discern other people's motivations. I get all kinds of comments from people. You're the greatest and you're the devil. I don't have to figure out their motivation. I just choose to take what informs me and let go of the rest. Here's a woman who says, my entire marriage, I knew that somewhere inside that all of the issues I had with my husband, the things that I couldn't stand, were somehow a reflection of my own issues. I tried, I really did, to see me, to see how I was the same in most of the ways, most of the things that I hated in him. I knew somewhere that that was so. I said many times the same thing to him. What brought us together was more about our issues than our love. So I want to distinguish something here that people usually fail to understand. It's very common for people to say, I see in other people only what is true in myself. Well, that's not true. We tend to see in other people what is familiar to us. So you both had behaviors that were simply familiar and comfortable. You were both controllers. And in some cases you had the same behaviors, but in other cases you were simply prepared by your parents to tolerate the behavior of the other person, which is another kind of familiarity. So we marry what we're familiar with, either what we saw our parents do or somebody that we would react to in the same way that we reacted to our parents. We don't always just see in other people what we see in ourselves. I can see that somebody's a murderer without my being a murderer. So I might marry somebody who's a controller, like myself. That would be a disaster. Or I might marry somebody who I would allow to control me, like I allowed my parents to control me. So in that case, I'm not seeing in my partner an issue that I have. I'm seeing an issue that I am comfortable with. So I marry a controller because I'm used to being a controlee. You continue. I just couldn't see me clearly enough. I'm incredibly grateful to you for speaking and showing me the truth, for having the courage to open my eyes and tell me what I do. Yes, the things that I see that I've done feel just awful, yet at the same time, amazingly liberating, like we were just talking about. Just this moment of vulnerability of light gives me hope, the hope and the will to push on to finally live. I may finally understand the word grateful. Woohoo for you, honey, since very few people do. Here's somebody who says, I want to tell the truth about myself in relationship to my husband. Call him John. Sometimes when he acts like a victim, I get annoyed and I want him to be different. I want him to lighten up. I want him to stop being afraid and worried and depressed. It's often no fun at all being around him. Sometimes I find myself changing my behavior based on how he's feeling. I tiptoe around him. Sometimes I'm afraid that he's going to be in a bad mood or withdrawn or depressed. That just sounds exhausting and depleting. Not only do you have to adjust to his bad moods, but you have to figure them out. What a drag. You continue. Sometimes when he acts like a victim, I am genuinely able to love him, and I'm interested in loving him. I feel concern for his pain and fear. I spend time with him so he doesn't feel alone. Even if he doesn't feel like talking or doing anything, he can often act like a blob. I ask him how he's doing. I do loving acts for him without expecting anything. Well, good for you. You do what you can. You continue. So like you were saying in your video chat, I've got a mixed bag going on. Who doesn't? Next week, we'll be going to wherever, New Hampshire, for Thanksgiving and spending time with my husband's adult daughters. We've been doing this for 4 years now. This is close to the date when one of the daughters died many years ago. And so Thanksgiving takes on an air of death, like a funeral. There have been a couple of incidents where he just got completely drunk and I had to put him to bed. And I told him that I wanted this trip to be relaxing. And I asked if he would not drink. He nodded his head, which I'm not sure is an answer. Honey, he just drags you around with a chain in your nose. This is the tiptoeing you're talking about. You asked him if he'd be willing to not drink, and he just kind of nodded his head. And so you're tiptoeing around and afraid to ask him what the nod means. You got to quit doing this. He nods, and you're afraid to ask him to answer you straight. You have to say, hey, John, look into my eyes. Not angry, just look into my eyes. Now, I'm asking you as your partner if you're willing to commit not to drink during this entire trip. See what I'm saying? It's very clear. Then you continue. What I want to know is it really okay if I don't love him or worry about him or change my behavior or give things up or take care of him in any way next week when he goes through this funeral-like thing? You be yourself. You give what you can. Be as loving to him as you can, really. Be clear about whether he's going to drink, because when he drinks enough, he just disappears. Why should you even be there if he's drinking to that extent? But you do not have to love him all the time. That's fairly impossible. We set impossible standards for ourselves. Stop beating yourself up for not being able to love him all the time. Relax, honey. Enjoy the time. In fact, you might make provisions that if he does drink and things become miserable, you'll go stay in a local hotel and go to movies and eat cookies. Sometimes you might take care of him if you can and you want to, but sometimes you won't. So you don't ever have to feel obligated to lift his mood and make him feel better. No fear, no worry, no tiptoeing. I know a woman who fought and kicked and lashed out, and she was in a group meeting and she was being pretty awful. And she was attacking me primarily, and I was actually answering her questions. I don't usually do that very long because people who are lashing out are fairly insane, but I actually explained myself and answered her questions for a little while. And it wasn't working. In fact, if you could have drawn a line through the middle of the room so that there were two semicircles, there were 12 people sitting on one semicircle and her all by herself in the other semicircle. She was so angry, she scared everybody out of their seats. So I just left her there for a while and let the group continue. And after a while, invited her over and just loved her. All the explanations in the world didn't make the slightest difference to her. And I partly went on with my explanations so that I could show the group how useless they are. And I explained. Maybe I went on with the explanations. Maybe I tried to be rational with her for too long. Who cares? The point is that when people get nuts, they don't listen. But when I simply held her and loved her, she just melted into a puddle. She later wrote and said, "I'm just sitting here weeping silently, grateful for how much you love me, especially when I'm being a horrifying brat." That's really kind of the only time that it counts to be loved, isn't it? Is when we're being a horrifying brat. It's easy to love somebody when they're being nice, but when they're being a brat, that's pretty priceless. So it was worth the experience. In fact, afterwards she referred to her, I can't remember the word she used for it, but her lashing out, her failure to be loving. And I suggested that she not see it as a failure. It turned out to be a delightfully educational experience. We learn from these mistakes. And if you learn from a mistake, does it really matter that you made it? So she learned to find love. She learned to trust it. It took her a little while. Then when she went home, she remembered it, and she found it easier to share it with other people. And it's made her an infinitely happier person, although she will still make this mistake probably again. Doesn't matter. Her overall progress is upward. And it will be with all of us as long as we stick with this simple, really relatively easy formula for finding and remembering love. It really works. I look forward to seeing you in a week.